So Elizabeth, I want to get as much information from you as possible in the limited time I have with you. First thing I want to ask, the scene in the courtroom, because I understand there might be a new person in the courtroom. Was Diddy's sister there today?
Yep, Diddy's sister definitely was inside that courtroom. She's actually been kind of a figure that's been inside and present inside that courtroom, while the other family members, including the sons, including the daughters, including Janice Combs, Diddy's mother, haven't been inside that courtroom. But we definitely still saw Diddy's sister inside that courtroom, just kind of paying attention to everything, as well as even one of Diddy's childhood friends. He's the one who's always kind of wearing the free puff sweatshirt, the free puff hat, while he's outside of the courtroom, definitely not inside the courtroom. But yeah, definitely Diddy did have some people on his side today, but just wasn't that full family presence that we were used to seeing, especially in those first couple of days.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting to always hear who appears there. Okay, so I have to talk about the testimony right now. We can get into David James in a little bit, but we talked about him a little bit yesterday. Talk to me about Cassandra Ventura's mother. So we knew that she was going to testify today. What was her value to the prosecution's case? Let's start there, and then we'll move into the cross-examination.
Yeah, well, initially we had thought, and by we mean me, Elizabeth, thought that Cassie's mother was inside that courtroom. I spoke with Cassie's attorney, Doug Wigder, who informed me that the person that we had initially thought was Cassie's mom was actually a victim's right advocate. So when Cassie's mom came into that courtroom, I was like, yes, this is definitely Cassie's mother, because they look so much alike. You would think that they were just looking kind of at an older version, a little bit of Cassie. But when she came inside that courtroom today to give her testimony, she just kind of walked up to the witness stand, kind of similar to how other witnesses have been doing it. But I think most notably, Diddy didn't really look in her way or look in her direction, at least when she had first entered the courtroom. At least when Cassie came inside the courtroom to do her testimony, even if it was on a day of cross, if it was on a day of direct, Diddy would kind of turn around and look whenever she had entered that courtroom, if he wasn't kind of chatting with his lawyers or anything like that. But as far as Regina Ventura coming into the courtroom today, it wasn't the same case. Diddy kind of sat while he was at his defense table chatting with his lawyers, but a lot of the testimony as far as Regina Ventura being on the stand today was kind of in relation to just everything she had witnessed from her daughter during her relationship with Diddy years before. So she had essentially said that she had met Diddy for the first time in 2006, actually when Diddy wasn't Cassie's boyfriend. This is when Cassie was actually signing to Bad Boy. Regina just knew of Diddy as Cassie's boss at the time, before the two being Cassie and Diddy began dating. They dated here in New York City, and then they had moved to Los Angeles together. And once they made that move to LA, because Regina Ventura, according to her, she had been living in New London, Connecticut for about 57 years. So she has roots here on the East Coast. So when Cassie had moved over to the West Coast, it wasn't the same situation, because she's all the way on the other side of the country, essentially. And so the contact and the visits weren't as frequent as when she was here in New York. But even when she was here in New York, it wasn't that often too. But what the prosecution really wanted to know from Regina was everything that had happened specifically in December of 2011. If you guys remember that time period, that's around the time that Diddy had accused Cassie of cheating on him with Kid Cudi and the whole Kid Cudi relationship. So around this time period, Cassie came home from the holidays. We saw an exhibit photo from an email from December 23rd of 2011, where Cassie emailed her mom on this email under the email address of Veronica Bang, one of the aliases that she had used. And she also attached Capricorn Clark, who had worked for Diddy, into this email. So I was able to scribble down just as much as I could as far as what all the contents were in this email, because this is an email that we had previously seen before. And so what Cassie relayed to her mother as well as Capricorn Clark was the threats that had been made toward me the threats that have been made toward me by Sean Combs are that he's going to release 2 explicit sex tapes of me, one on Christmas Day, maybe before or right after, and another one sometime soon after. He also said that he will be having someone hurt me and Scott being Kid Cudi, physically. And it wouldn't be at the hands of Diddy himself. It would be essentially kind of saying that it would be up to somebody else's hands. But when Cassie's mom was on the stand and just kind of responding to everything like that, she had said things such as, the sex tapes threw me. I thought he was trying to hurt my daughter. And then they brought in that Diddy essentially demanded $20,000 from Cassie, pretty much, to the point that Regina and her husband, Cassie's father, took out a home equity loan for $20,000 just to meet Diddy's demand after he had requested money And so Regina said that Diddy was essentially angry because he had spent money on Cassie, and Cassie was with somebody else, that other person being Kid Cudi, and that Regina had sent this $20,000 check after getting this loan from the bank to the bad boy account. But here's the thing, Jesse, is just 4 to 5 days later, this check was actually returned to Regina and her family, so the money was given back to them. And this was something before the jury had even come in today that they were talking about in court outside of the presence of the jury, because the defense didn't want this testimony in. They wanted nobody to hear this testimony. But this testimony came in today, so we did kind of know what a preview of it would be, and so she had testified to that fact today while on the stand. But we had seen some more exhibit photos, those taken of Regina again in that 2011 time period of Cassie being bruised. They had mentioned that Cassie, her particular hairstyle around this time was that of a shaved head. Regina confirmed that between 2009 to 2011, Cassie's hair was shaved, and that's what the hairstyle that we had seen of Cassie kind of posing with some of the bruises inflicted by her then boyfriend, that being of Diddy. And so a lot of the big testimony, especially when it came to Regina Ventura being under direct examination, was about this $20,000 loan. Then there was another incident they had talked about. This one from this is from 2016. So this was around. This was actually that same year the Intercontinental Hotel incident had happened, that essentially Regina traveled to LA for Cassie's birthday. Diddy took Cassie's phone after being mad at her. And then there was this whole incident where Regina called the police, and that Diddy gave the phone back eventually. Regina was screaming at Diddy to give her daughter her phone back, and that Regina even owned up to the fact that she tried to hit Diddy while the person in the middle of this was D-Rock, one of the security guards, was in this kind of trying to de-escalate the entire situation. But when it came to the cross-examination, I didn't even know what to expect for the cross-examination. But spoiler alert, there actually was no cross-examination. Mark Agnifilo got up on the stand and he essentially said, "I have no questions for you, Miss Ventura." Yeah. And then Regina Ventura was off the witness stand and done for the day.
Yeah, I think that's very strategic when defense chooses not to cross-examine a witness. There might be no benefit to them. There might be nothing they need to gain. They might be accepting what she says and just recharacterizing it. Remember, a big theme in this case is it might be domestic violence, might be a turbulent relationship, but it's not sex trafficking or racketeering. Okay, so Elizabeth, I know I only have a few more minutes with you, so I want to move on to the additional testimony of a man we heard about last week, The Punisher. That's his nickname. Who is The Punisher? What did he testify to so far?
Yep. Well, The Punisher, when he had come in, didn't even realize he was The Punisher. Because let me tell you something, Jesse. When we're seeing these exhibit photos of all the different men and the different escorts that were used during these freak-offs, or were kind of playing this type of role in these fantasies that were talked about during testimony, sometimes it's hard to be like, oh, wow, that's actually this person. So when Sharay Hayes walked inside the courtroom today, I was like, oh, they're going to have another testimony from another person who worked with Diddy. But that wasn't the case. Immediately, just right off the bat, he had said that his nickname was The Punisher and that he was a male exotic dancer. And I was like, oh, that kind of clicked. So he had walked in. He's a very tall man. He's well put together. He had an entire suit on with a tie. He's very built. And the first thing that the prosecution asked was just about the exhibit photos, those exhibit photos being just kind of a standard press photo, essentially, of Diddy and Cassie. And he confirmed that that's Cassie Ventura and that's Sean Combs, a.k.a. Diddy. And so he said in the fall of 2012, he was paid to create a sexy, erotic scene for a woman who had called him. He said that he met the two while he was working at a club event, but it was a woman who had called him saying that she wanted kind of a present by her husband around her birthday time, and that her husband said it was okay if she were to hire a dancer. So the Punisher initially thought that he was going to be doing kind of a dance for women at a bachelorette party, but when somebody opened the door, it was, lo and behold, Cassie Ventura. He had said that she was wearing a bathrobe and she was a wig, and initially didn't even recognize her at first. But this was this first meetup that they had, again, expecting a crowd during this, but really it was just Cassie in the room. Again, not knowing it was Cassie at the time. And then he was told that her husband wanted her to put baby oil on each other and create this kind of fantasy, this erotic scene essentially, and that Cassie handed him $800. But he had one kind of stipulation. He was told specifically not to acknowledge the husband or say anything to him. He said all the furniture was covered with sheets. There was baby oil and water off to the side, and that the Punisher and Cassie just rubbed baby oil on one another. He said after, while this was kind of going on, a man came out. He was nude. He had Astroglide in his hand, and however, his face was covered. And he says that during this, the husband, per se, was pleasuring himself and that type of thing. And the prosecution asked, was this man giving any type of direction or anything like that? The Punisher responded that that the direction was move to the side or position your body a certain way, and that this entire encounter lasted about 25 minutes to about half an hour, and that he actually didn't know it was Diddy or Sean Combs himself until later on. But he said after this whole entire encounter, he got more money, an additional $1,200. And then he was contacted again a few times, and he said he did this about 8 to 12 times even after the fact. And so that's where we would wrapped up when we were getting out of court for the lunch break. And so I expect testimony to pick up and go more into just everything the Punisher had kind of did during this entire time frame. Again, the husband that he now knows to be Sean Combs, and again, the woman kind of pretending to be the wife, and this fantasy play that being Cassie Ventura. So I expect more testimony to come from the Punisher, but don't know kind of what direction that'll go into. Sometimes you just never know in this case.
Listen, that's what we're trying to figure out. So, you are our eyes and our ears in that courtroom, always giving us up-to-date, detailed responses about what's happening with this testimony. And now we're here to try to break it down and try to make sense of it in the overall context. Elizabeth Millner, thank you so much for taking the time.
You're welcome, Jesse.
All right, so now we get back into the conversation. Okay, so we have questions coming in here, Serena and William. Before we even go into what Elizabeth said, we have a question that came in, a super chat question from Nest Dog. So thank you so much, Nest Dog. Serena, I'll throw it to you. I'm not sure I completely understand this question, but it says, if Puffy's return money, is it still extortion? I'm not sure I quite follow that one, but I'll throw it to you, Serena.
I think the import of that testimony, of the fact that Puffy asked them or demanded the $20,000, is less about whether they made out the elements of extortion, and it's more to show how abusive Puff was in that moment. $20,000 for P. Diddy is nothing. It's chump change. But for Cassie and her family, it required them to take out a loan. It just goes to show the kind of control and abuse that he portrayed during that time period, which goes again towards the RICO charge of him controlling this criminal enterprise. And so I think that potentially the defense wanted to argue, we shouldn't hear this testimony. It's irrelevant. Maybe their argument was the money was returned and therefore there was no harm, no foul. But obviously the judge ruled that it was relevant to hear. And I think it goes towards the elements of the RICO charge for sure.
Talking about the questions that we have money. We have another poll that we put up on YouTube. After the $20 million settlement against Diddy, should Cassie have pursued criminal charges, yes or no? Talk about that in a second. William, I want to go to you. We have another question that came in that I thought was really interesting. This is from the Gemini Lab. Why do you think the defense skipped cross on Regina Ventura? Was that smart strategy or just no ammo?
Oh, I think it was brilliant. Cross-examining a victim's mother is very difficult to do. I don't think there was anything they could gain from her testimony. I actually think that it was exactly what I would have done. I think it's what most defense attorneys would have done. She painted a picture. She emphasized the domestic violence that clearly the defense had already accepted. The defense is almost essentially admitted to. And I think that there was nothing that they could have added in cross-examination. I think that she came across as a sympathetic figure, and I think that cross-examining her would have cut against anything the defense was trying to do.
I have a question from Amanda Tavares, but it's not for any of us, guys. It was actually for Elizabeth Millner, so I can't answer her question. But the question was, I have a question for the esteemed courtroom reporter whose name currently escapes me, Elizabeth Millner. Given the evidence presented, what is her assessment of the defendant's likelihood of acquittal? So when Elizabeth comes back on here, if she comes back on here, if they should decide not to come back on break, we'll ask her that question. Here's a question from Alexander Mateo for you, Serena. Will they ever show any of the evidence taken from Diddy's homes during the raids?
I would expect that they would. I mean, I think that the evidence that was gotten from his home is going to support the sex trafficking charge, is going to support the lifestyle that they're claiming P. Diddy had and imposed onto other people. I think even the fact of the matter that there were so many bottles of baby oil, for example, and Astroglide, I think that shows that it's more. I mean, we used to argue this as prosecutors. If you recovered a small amount of drugs, right, the argument is it was personal use. But if you recovered a huge amount of drugs, now you're talking about a drug dealer, potential enterprise. And so I think that these are elements of the crime. These are tools of the crime. And I do think that we will learn about what was recovered. And I think they'll use that against him.
It does become a question what we, the public, will see, right? So there were portions of sex tapes that were shown to the jury. As of right now, none of us are going to see that. And I actually, even someone from the media, I would say, I understand. I think that the risk of that getting out and what could be done with that outweighs whatever benefit there might be for a public interest, newsworthy exception for us to see it. I get it. It's an important piece of evidence, particularly if you have Combs maybe directing these performances as alleged by prosecutors and the witnesses. But at the same time, this is just such private details, such sensitive material. There is a concern about it getting out and how much of the public will see. Have a question here for you, Will. This is from Joe Midori. If Sean Combs is guilty on all allegations, what will be his sentencing?
Well, I think that if you stack everything on top of each other, he's looking at 100+ years. So there's so many charges here. Obviously, that's not what's going to happen here. If he's found guilty, there will be a pre-sentence report. That's how this works in the federal system. Each of the crimes with which he's charged, and for each crime he's convicted of, there is a range that he could be subjected to.